Welcome to Straight Talk from an Insider on global energy, climate, and the Shale Revolution. Please welcome Diana Furchtgott-Roth, Director of the Heritage Foundation's Center for Energy, Climate, and Environment.
It's great to be with you today to talk about energy, climate, and the Shale Revolution. We are so honored to have with us Chris Wright, who's CEO and Chairman of the Board of Liberty Energy. And he is going to give us a few words on what his company does and on the energy situation. I'm going to ask him some questions, and then all of you in the audience and the 400 people online are going to get to ask questions also. And I just want to tell you, the first questions emailed are going to be the ones that Chris gets. Well, Chris's career has been spent in the energy area. He was one of the first pioneers of fracking. He founded Pinnacle Technologies, and he served as its CEO from 1992 to 2006. And as all of you know, Pinnacle created the hydraulic fracture mapping industry, and its innovations helped launch the Shale Revolution. Chris was chairman of Stroud Energy, an early shale gas producer, and he is the foremost exponent of how fossil fuels lead everybody to a better life, and more energy leads everybody to a better life. And I just want to have a personal anecdote at the beginning of this, which is that for the past few days, my son, his 3 little children, and his wife have been living at our house. Why? Because their heating system went out. He didn't want to stay in a cold house, so they all moved in with us. And he said if he hadn't moved in with us, he would have gone to a hotel. People don't like living without energy. So I'm going to turn it over to Chris. Welcome, and thank you for coming all the way from Denver to speak to us.
Thanks, Diana. Glad to be here. And thanks to everyone else for joining online or in person for your time. But yeah, energy has been a lifelong passion of mine since I was a young kid. In fact, I didn't appreciate hydrocarbons fully at the start. I actually chose my college. I went to MIT specifically to work on fusion energy, because there was sort of a mania then that was also about the world ending and also about oil and gas as the problem. But the mania then was that we were going to run out of oil and gas, and that running out of oil and gas would end industrial civilization. And heck, that was a frightening thing to a young kid. And as sort of a science math guy, I thought, I want to work on that problem. And fusion energy powers the stars. It's 99.999% of all the energy in the universe. Humans are ingenious. I'm going to go work on that problem. I'm excited to do that. It's obviously proven to be a trickier problem than a kid would have appreciated. Humans are ingenious. Humans will figure it out. But that's a longer-term game. I worked on solar energy briefly in graduate school at UC Berkeley. So I was all in on energy all along. And I've been lucky in many ways in my life. Meeting my wife when I was 18 years old was huge. And in fact, she's the one who, when a missed paycheck at Berkeley, got me a consulting job at a little Silicon Valley company of all things that was in the oil and gas industry. That's how I got into this industry. I love it. As Diana mentioned, I started a company called Pinnacle Technologies, another shale gas producer, another shale oil producer. And the company I run today, most of my efforts today are for a company called Liberty Energy. We started about 11 and a half years ago, hydraulic fracturing. So the technology around it, as well as the horsepower. We have 2.5 to 3 million horsepower of trucks. We frack a little more than 15% of all the wells drilled in the United States or Canada. And I do the simple roll-up math of that. It means 8% of total U.S. primary energy production comes from wells fracked by Liberty. That's roughly twice the entire energy produced in the United States from wind and solar. And of course, it's dispatchable, reliable energy for process heat, for electricity, for materials, not an intermittent, lower value source of energy. So I love energy, and glad to be here.
Wonderful, Chris. Well, all of you have on your chairs Chris's report, Bettering Human Lives. Those of you online have a link to it, so you can click on it. Can you tell us something about your volume, Bettering Human Lives, and why you put it out every year?
This started from, look, I've been speaking on energy and climate change and poverty and these issues for quite some time. But we took our company public about 5 years ago, and there's big pressure. You're a public company, and you're in our industry, nominally the bad guys. You should write an ESG report. And when I looked at those reports, I was actually horrified. You know, they were mostly, they read to me like apologies that we're in this industry. How can you apologize to be in the industry that makes the modern world possible? It's been that together with human liberty, I think the two factors that have led to a doubling of human life expectancy and a just transformation of the human condition over the last 2 centuries. So I read reports of other companies and thought, I think that's wrong. I think that's offensive. So the only answer to that is I should write our own ESG report, and it's quite different. And we try to just lay out the big picture issues. Where does the world get energy? How has that changed with time? What's the biggest energy challenge today? By far and away, that's energy poverty. Millions of people die every year, simply preventable diseases, because they don't have access to the same fuels we have. Second biggest global energy challenge, in my view, is providing reliable, affordable, secure energy to enable everyone else that's not in dire poverty, but that enables the possibility of your life, to heat your son's home so his kids are comfortable and they can do their homework and go on with their lives. And then the third biggest, but a distant third, is climate change. And I, at some length, write about climate change. I just overview what it is, what the data is, what we know about it. There's some effort just showing the extreme weather, since that's the big issue today. We're claiming storms are getting worse. Of course, they're not. And that's uncontroversial for people familiar with the data. And then I talk about climate economics. You know, this is a real issue. The burning of hydrocarbons is the main driver of the 50% increase in CO2. But what's the impacts of that? And what's the timescale at which this might manifest? And the short answer is it's a slow-moving, rather modest problem compared to so many issues in society. But yet it's used as a political justification to do so many other things. And I think by far the biggest challenge with climate change today is policies pursued in the name of climate change that make energy more expensive and less reliable, and therefore hurt human lives, particularly those least able to bear those extra burdens and those extra costs. And there's a bunch of stuff about our company in that report as well. But it's an attempt to say, yes, our industry maybe does a dime's worth of damage to the world, and it's honorable to shrink that to 9 or 8 cents. That's a penny or two benefit. We're all in on that. But we do $1 worth of benefit. And if we can grow that dollar to $1.10 or $1.25, that's 10 times more benefit. So we have to have a more balanced view of energy, not just apologize we're in it. We need to understand, where do we need more energy, and why does the cost and availability of energy matter? So it's a very different ESG report.
It really is, Chris. And I'd like to tell you another story. The reason I'm here in the United States, the reason I met my husband, is because when my father interviewed for a job in the United States back in the 1960s, he called back to London and said to my mother, "We have to move to America. In America, they heat the bathrooms." That was such a big step from what people were used to in London in the 1960s, that he thought this was the place to live. So the whole family moved here.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Glad you're here. You made our country better for it. Thank you.
Well, I hope I'm not making it worse. I'd like to ask you, which state and which countries are easiest to do business in? You do fracking all over the world. Where do you find that regulations are the most onerous, and where do you find it easiest to produce?
Well, I would say the most practical state for regulations in the United States is North Dakota. North Dakota, the Shale Revolution began with natural gas, changed the game, not just for U.S., but global natural gas prices. Gas molecules are very small. Shales are almost impermeable rocks. You could spill water on them on your kitchen counter. It would evaporate before it would move through that rock. That's the problem with shale. The first place the Shale Revolution moved to oil was in North Dakota. And of course, the oil Shale Revolution changed the game even more than the natural gas. But North Dakota has a competitive, serious regulatory environment. Of course, we're producing on private land that's farmers and ranchers that have been there for generations. They're passionate about their land. I would say North Dakota has thoughtful, serious regulations, but they're to protect health and safety and make sure the economics of the situation for surface owners versus subsurface owners is all handled well. But there's not needless obstacles that really aren't about health and safety. They're just about scoring points to kick our industry or to slow us down. So North Dakota is the best state to operate in. Nations, I don't have a ton of experience there, but I would say United States, clearly the winner there. United States has grown our oil and natural gas production more in the last 10 years than any nation ever on earth. We're the largest producer of oil, largest producer of natural gas, and I would say more importantly, by far and away the largest producer of natural gas liquids. Propane, as I write in this report, is my favorite hydrocarbon. It's the hydrocarbon that's the bridge to lift people out of poverty, to solve indoor air pollution, to make petrochemicals, to have rural people in America, in farms, have a clean fuel like natural gas that you don't need a pipeline for. It burns clean like a gas, but you can transport it as a liquid. Propane is a wonder material. I testified in the House of Lords in the United Kingdom, birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, the birthplace of Diana. And I said the Industrial Revolution began because we had secure property rights, an entrepreneurial spirit, and an energy cost advantage. Just transformative for the world. You go to the Midlands of England today, and we're 0 for 3. We've got expensive energy, an entrepreneurial spirit that's been crushed because it's very hard to do anything. They actually created a shale gas commission. They put some rules in place. They were going to move forward with shale development. This is 8 years ago in the United Kingdom. And 100 protesters blocking a road for days meant even though the law said the development could happen, the money was paid, the resources were there, 100 protesters took away the property rights of this business, Quadrilla, and its partners in developing shale gas in England. And in fact, those 100 people meaningfully lowered the quality of life of everyone living in the United Kingdom today. This is something that shouldn't happen, but shamefully didn't happen.
Right, and the United Kingdom had fracking for 1 week before Rishi Sunak came in. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak in the United Kingdom rolled it back 1 week after Liz Truss had put it in. It was one of the first things that he did.
Yes.
Was roll back the right to frack. And electricity prices in the United Kingdom have quadrupled over the past year. Well, speaking of rising prices, can you tell us what inflation and the rising price of energy has done to your industry over the past couple of years and to your company?
Well, yes, I often get asked, hey, with this administration, not just at the federal level, but state levels, they're going to ruin your industry. I'm sorry, Chris, this is too bad. And my answer to that always is, that's not the case at all. When we have restrictive, irrationally restrictive policies against the production of oil and natural gas, those do nothing to change the demand for oil and natural gas. Most of the demands for oil and natural gas, there's not a substitutable alternative. So when you restrict the supply and you don't change the demand, you do one thing, you raise the price. So our business today is the most profitable it's ever been. As I say, I'm one of those people needlessly enriched by sort of the bad energy policy environment we live in today. I don't celebrate that. In fact, I adamantly oppose it. Also, the demonization of our industry over the last 10 years has made it harder to recruit people to come work into our industry. So we've got an internal recruiting department now. We go above and beyond. We employ people, I think, from 46 states. We only have operations in like 8 states. But we employ people from 46 states because they work on a 2 weeks on, 2 week off schedule. It's a blue collar, rural, blue collar, typically from rural areas, $100,000 a year starting salaries, and you work 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, home with your family. So I'm very proud that we're changing a number of small rural communities by bringing high paying jobs to people wherever they and their families are. So it's made it a little bit harder to recruit. Obviously, inflation's had the same wage pressure. Supply chain issues have been a real challenge for us. Caterpillar, the greatest maker of big equipment in the world, is on allocation today, of who gets what piece and what part. 3 years after the start of the pandemic, there's just simply 2 or 3 million people are still out of the labor force. And that hurts. Key people and key businesses are gone, so everything's, the gears are still gummed up a little bit. But our business conditions are strong. Frankly, I wish they weren't quite so strong. I wish we had a little bit freer ability to produce more oil and natural gas, bring the prices down.
Yeah. Well, you talked about your environmental, social, and governance policy that's outlined in your book here that all of you have, and those of you online can download using the link. What about your diversity, equity, and inclusion policy? We hear a lot about diversity, equity, and inclusion in Washington, D.C.
Yes, and we are for diverse ideas and diverse talents. We need a little bit of a uniformity on a passion to make the world a better place and to work hard. But no, we don't play any games by judging people by their skin color or their gender. The great thing about America was it's a meritocracy, and we don't care what anyone's skin color or gender or sexual preference is. We don't care at all. We want great humans that are going to drive our business forward. Now, in today's world, think of we're an oil and gas company, right? But in our corporate headquarters, where finance and technology and engineering is, it's roughly 50% women, 50% men. That's no engineering design. That's just candidates. Great, we hire the best people. On a frac crew itself, sadly, or maybe not sadly, it's 99% male. We hire everyone. We have women working on frac crews, but very little. Different choices are made in what people want to do, and we're not going to change people's preferences or choices. We are absolutely a land of opportunity, and we believe in lowering barriers, human liberty. I was a very early signer of the, I'm blanking on the name of it, but criminal justice reform. We have a number of people that were formerly incarcerated in prison. They made bad decisions young in life. We don't care about where they came from. We care about where they're going. We have dozens of people that came with a very rough start in life, but if they're ban the box was the thing. It's not the first question we ask. It's not about someone's past. It's about where you are today and where you're going. Probably a quarter of our employees are not native English speakers, mostly people from Mexico and Central America that migrated to this country with a great work ethic and drive a lot of the work in rural areas and blue collar stuff, mechanics, frac hands, all the way up to management in our company. But so our thing is, we don't have a policy, but just by being a meritocracy, if you look at the Liberty personnel, you'll see the rainbow that makes America beautiful.
Yes, yes. Well, Chris, we hear a lot in Washington about high energy prices. President Biden says he wants prices to go down. Americans are hurting because of high electricity prices. Have any of them called you up to ask you how to lower energy prices in the United States?
I'm looking at that phone all the time, Diane. I'm waiting for a little wiggle or a ring or something, and no, I've heard from no one in the current administration. They
haven't asked you to be on any boards, any commissions, join the Energy Department, join the National Economic Council?
Not at all, not at all. Perhaps my outspokenness on what might be the road to get there precludes me. But honestly, I don't know anyone, any of my colleagues, any of the CEOs of oil and gas companies. I don't know anyone that has been reached out to.
That's really surprising because of all the problems they talk about here in Washington. One would be thinking they would reach out to you or people in your position or people in the industry that have the experience that can help some of these problems go away.
I could qualify that. Our president, I believe, has reached out to 0 people in our industry. There have been people at the Department of Energy that have reached out to some of my customers, some of the larger oil and gas producers, and 9 months ago or whatever, and asked them to produce more oil and gas. Not hey, we're going to issue federal permits on land, we're going to stop the regulatory strangle, hey, we want to sort of reset the game here. There was no proposed changes, but there were, from administration officials, not the president, asks for more oil and gas, which is kind of a curious ask.
It really is, yes. What do you think about the president going to Venezuela and Saudi Arabia and asking them to produce more?
Yeah, it's just truly, it's outrageous. Of course, it's crazy. I hear it, and let me take it in another way, Diana. There's a lot of push that, well, we're not going to approve these pipelines, and we're not going to drill on federal land. What's the justification? It's for climate change reasons, right? So again, the demand for oil and gas is what the demand for oil and gas is. If you don't drill in the United States, right, the same amount of oil is going to be consumed, the same amount of natural gas is going to be consumed. It's just going to be produced somewhere else. So some other people are going to have those jobs. Some other people are going to have those businesses. Certainly, they're not going to have as clean of production practices as the United States. So I say that's a policy. Banning drilling on federal land is guaranteed to raise greenhouse gas emissions. That's just a given. It isn't hugely, but it's a guaranteed way to raise greenhouse gas emissions and lower economic activity in the United States. Like, what world is this a policy that that an administration has rallied behind and stood behind?
Yeah, no one really knows. No one really knows where it comes from. How about China? China's using coal-fired power plants to make the wind turbines and solar panels that it's sending over to us. Has China expressed any interest in fracking clean natural gas or the fracking industry?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I went over to China for the first time in 1994, and I was hired by the United Nations Development Program to teach a class on hydraulic fracturing for coal bed methane production in China. And I went back and presented some papers on that. So I went to China a number of times in the late 90s. In older style oil and gas production, where there's a product called ceramic proppant. It's the thing that holds the fractures open. And before we had the shale technology, how good that proppant was mattered. So ceramic manufacturing of proppant was invented and started in the United States. Chinese built a number of factories that lowered that supply chain price of that product. That product's almost obsolescent today. But yeah, China, of course, has been very focused on energy production. But as I show, I think in one of the opening plots in that report, if we roll the clock back 15 years ago, the United States was the largest importer of natural gas in the world. We had over 1,000 rigs drilling for natural gas. Today, there's 100 and some rigs drilling for natural gas. And we're the second largest exporter, net exporter of natural gas in the world. Only Russia is ahead of us. I suspect we'll pass them in the next couple of years. We were the largest importer of oil. Now we're by far and away the largest producer of oil and a non-trivial exporter of oil products. China went the opposite direction. 15 years ago, China produced almost as much energy, roughly balanced. They produced as much energy as they consumed. They had the Daqing oil field, which really floated the communists for 30 or 40 years, one of the probably second biggest oil field in the world. And China produced as much energy as they consumed. Now China is they're the largest energy importer in the world, largest natural gas importer in the world, largest oil importer in the world. So we've really changed positions. The U.S. today has just an enormous energy and energy cost advantage over China. But we could be in the process of tripping that up. With the Inflation Reduction Act, we're going to spend hundreds of billions of dollars, with the only sure result being electricity will be more expensive and less reliable.
But could China do fracking and produce its own natural gas, or does it not have those fields there, or does it not have the technology?
So it's tried. China has two problems. One is the Himalayan mountains. When the Indian subcontinent crashed into the Asian subcontinent, it put a larger stress on the rocks. And shales, if they have too high a stress on them, it closes down what little permeability they have. So they do have a little bit of a technically harder situation than we have. But they don't have the technology, the innovation, the companies that will experiment and will gamble. And they have one other problem that the United Kingdom also has today. The United States is the only country in the world where the private landowner, the farmer and rancher, owns the minerals beneath their feet. So when we go out and we're entrepreneurial, our partnership is with those farmers and those ranchers. They want to protect their land. They want to protect their farm. They want all the things you would want if it was your land. But of course, there are partners in developing those resources. When I went to United Kingdom, I would say the birthplace of property rights, nationalized all the ownership of minerals early in the 20th century. So if I want to go drill for shale gas in the United Kingdom, the government, the British government is my partner, technically the crown. Is an entrepreneur going to go do that? No. China has the same problem. The government owns all the mineral rights. So the farmers and people that own the land above it, they don't get the benefit from development. So they've had more opposition. They don't have an entrepreneurial system. They don't have a pipeline network. So they could, They're doing more than the Europeans are doing, but they're a long way behind.
Yeah, yeah. Well, now we're going to take a break and watch a brief movie featuring Chris, and then we're going to go to audience questions. One question from here, one question from online. So let's look.
I'm Chris Wright, CEO of Liberty Energy. North Face recently came out against my industry, even refusing to let one of my competitors put their company logo on a North Face jacket. I went through North Face's website, wide-ranging products, and I failed to find a single product that wasn't made out of oil and gas. The great majority of North Face's products, jackets, backpacks, outdoor pants, shirts, shoes, hats, etc., dominantly made out of the oil and gas that we so proudly produce. Globally, 60% of all clothing fibers are made out of oil and gas. For North Face, it is likely 90% or more. So North Face is not only an extraordinary customer of the oil and gas industry, they are also a partner with the oil and gas industry. So thank you, North Face.
All right, well, thanks very much for producing that. And we're going to go to audience questions here. Please state your name, affiliation, and then ask a brief question, not a comment. We want questions because we have a lot of them. Let's start with this question over here.
Myron Ebel, Competitive Enterprise Institute. Chris, I'm glad to see that you're not in Davos this week, along with many other oil executives. And I just want to congratulate you for being such a great defender of an industry where many CEOs are unwilling and, in fact, apologize for what they do. But I want to ask you, it took 150 years or more to create the current infrastructure that we have. And we now have political leaders like President Biden and John Kerry and all the foreigners who say we can go to net zero by 2030 or 2035 or 2050. What do you think about the technical side of that? Abandoning the infrastructure that we built over 150 years, that not me, but the industry has built over 150 years, and creating something new that will at least produce as much energy as the current infrastructure?
Well, I mean, the short answer is there's no chance of it happening. Zero. In fact, most all of this efforts, they're not meaningful threats to our industry. Everything you hear about, wind, solar, geothermal, tidal power, whatever, these are all in the electricity sector. Electricity is 20% of global energy. 20%. Pave the world with solar panels and wind turbines, you'd still have a firming problem. But that's just 20% of global energy. In fact, wind turbines, and I discussed this, wind turbines are sort of highly visible embodiments of hydrocarbons, right? They have these giant cement bases that you cannot make without coal and natural gas. Reinforced steel, can't make without coal and natural gas. The towers themselves, those big towers, each have over 100 tons of coal in the tower. The coking coal that you with iron and coal to make them. Those giant blades, they're made out of oil, made with and by and out of oil. So that the problem of wind and solar, just to hit the sort of politically popular ones, is the amount of energy it takes to make those systems. You only get 2, 3, 4, 5 times as much energy back out. Like zero chance of being economically viable on a large scale. A little bit less than 3% of global energy today, trillions of dollars of subsidies, countless mandates, 30 years. The UN climate movement, the energy transition movement began in Rio in 1992. At that time, the world got 87% of our primary energy from hydrocarbons. Today it's 84. 30 years. 3% change in market share, and we have record demand for oil today, record demand for natural gas, record demand for coal. But to manufacture materials, to make cement, steel, plastics, and fertilizer, I cover this in the report. Those are the 4 pillars of the modern world. Can't do anything without one or all of those 4 components. They're all not only, we don't have another way to make them without hydrocarbons. Partially process heat. In any case, one of the terms I say, this energy transition term that's thrown around, it's not happening. And it doesn't matter what government policy does. There's not going to be a meaningful transition in the global energy source for many decades to come. I'm a huge fan of nuclear. I think it should grow, both fission and fusion power, but that'll still be slow. The energy system as it exists today will not be meaningfully different in 2050, our net zero goal. But the attempt to drive that, to get that 3% change in market share, has been quite destructive. It's driven up the price of energy. It's driven down the reliability of electricity, our most important network in the world. And it's just moved industry from the original industrial powerhouses of the United States, North America, and Europe, who began industrialization. Europe has just deindustrialized itself gradually over the last 20 or 30 years, and now it's going to happen more rapidly. But that's not a greenhouse gas reduction. If you don't make something in a modern factory powered by natural gas in the United Kingdom, you instead build it in a lower tech coal-powered factory in Vietnam and then ship the goods on diesel-powered ships back, that's not a greenhouse gas reduction. So all these country and state-based targets are just foolish. The United Kingdom has the largest percentage drop in their greenhouse gases. Absolute terms, that's the US. In percentage terms, it's the United Kingdom, and they're very proud about it. But what they don't point out is they've had a 40% drop in their greenhouse gas emissions. They've had a 30% drop in total energy consumption. They just exported their industry out and made energy expensive, and if something's expensive and less reliable, you consume less of it. They use the same products, they're just not made there anymore. So what the report and my efforts in general are just try to bring a little bit of common sense, which means looking at numbers for climate change, poverty, energy, and where it comes from.
And a reminder for those of you online, we have posted the link to the report called Bettering Human Lives. Well, this question leads to our first online question. Chris, you mentioned the former mania that we would run out of fossil fuels. Do you have an estimate today as to how much fossil fuels we have left in terms of time?
Forever.
Forever.
Forever. Forever.
Yeah.
I say to people, when you talk about energy, that the Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones. And the age of hydrocarbons, which again will be around for a long time, and I think it will have a gradual reduction, most likely as nuclear technologies become better. With great nuclear technology, we could produce most all of our electricity that way. With nuclear, you can also get process heat, so it can be valuable in manufacturing. Pharmaceuticals, the drugs we take to keep us alive, those have hydrocarbons in them. So hydrocarbons will be in the human system forever, and the worry about running out of them is just gone. Mm-hmm. I always say to people, 1 million years from now, 90% of the hydrocarbons that were underground 1 million years ago will still be underground. The resource base is just unbelievably large. There was the confusion that drove the mania in the 80s was that reserves were somehow a measurement of how much hydrocarbon there are. Nonsense. It's how much a company has that it's going to develop in a reasonable time frame with today's technology. It's viable today. Well, all the shales, over 70% of U.S. gas and over 50% of U.S. oil today comes from shale production technology. 30 years ago, people would have laughed at you said you're going to get oil and gas out of shale. That's just 30 years ago. There's methane hydrates at the bottom of all the ocean floors, just a godzillion amount of natural gas. There's oil in all different forms in kerogen. We have think of it roughly with 500 million years of stored solar energy buried underground. Right? That's oil. The dinosaurs didn't become oil and gas. It was seaborne life, but seas cover 70% of the Earth. It's the phytoplankton that live in the ocean for 500 million years that are buried and converted into kerogen and heavy oil and eventually into natural gas in this product suite. The resource base is unbelievable. We will never run out of oil and gas.
Okay. All right. That's great to know.
Too long of an answer.
No, absolutely. We have a question over here. Just state your name and the question.
Yeah. So I'm Bill Walters, University of Maryland, Atmospheric, Nuclear, and Environmental Chemistry. Could you tell us about Joe Manchin's pipeline and the Marcellus Shale?
Yes. So, look, The shale revolution began in the Barnett Shale of Texas, just under the northern suburbs of Fort Worth, Texas. And this company, Mitchell Energy, had a gas supply contract with a Chicago utility that guaranteed them a certain price for gas from that field. And well, they were running out of gas from that field, and they said, we're going to figure out how to get more in this field, and there was a shale. So the Barnett Shale is nowhere near the best shale. It was the shale in this gas contract area, but it changed the world. The best to date so far shale from which to produce natural gas is the Marcellus Shale, and below it's the Utica Shale, another just enormous shale. The size of the resource is unbelievable, and it underlies Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Ohio, and southern New York. And we know how much value and blue-collar jobs and low energy is coming out of New York. But
because New York is refusing to get that shale. They're not getting it out of the ground, so it's just there.
So this resource area that had not recently been that active in oil and gas development, had this fantastic shale. Now, look, production only started there 14, 15 years ago. That region today produces about 50% as much natural gas as the entire United States did 15 years ago, and 30% of today's massive U.S. production. It could produce massively more, but it's limited by the ability to take that gas and to move it to marketplace. And so as the pipelines that used to exist came from Texas and Oklahoma to pipe natural gas up to the Northeast. Those old pipelines got reversed to send natural gas down to where the petrochemical and industry is in the United States and for export. And some new pipelines have been built, but in the last 10 years, again, just crazy, justified in the name of climate change, is we're going to stop building pipelines. So the natural gas production today is limited by its ability to move natural gas out. The Mountain Valley Pipeline, the Joe Manchin pipeline, is over 90% constructed. These are multi-billion-dollar, 1,000-mile-long infrastructure buried pipeline projects. But there's a couple disputed areas about whether it can cross this area or go that area. It had permits, and the permits got removed. So what Joe Manchin wants, and what anybody with common sense wants, is finish that pipeline so that that natural gas can leave there and go down to the southeastern United States, so that Georgia and Alabama and the Carolinas can have low-cost heating fuel and continue to grow their electricity production. Another pipeline that goes across New York to take gas from the Marcellus into New England was a big fight, and they didn't approve the expansion. Just put more compressors so you can push more gas through that pipeline. Didn't get done for climate reasons nominally. So what's the result today? Natural gas prices in the U.S. today are like $3.50. Just that's a million British thermal units. Don't worry about the units. $3.50. In New England, they're about 5 times that expensive. So they can't get enough natural gas. They can't get enough natural gas to power all the electricity they want. So at peak electricity demand, New England has had periods, weekends, where they're over 25% of their electricity comes from burning oil. Oil. Dirtier, more expensive. That no one burns oil for electricity except Hawaii and island nations that can't get natural gas or other sources. But the standing in the way of infrastructure has made New England have high power prices, increasing oil. They used to get their supplemental natural gas, liquefied natural gas from Russia. A few photos were taken of the Russian tankers unloading gas at Boston Harbor, and they don't do that anymore. But California suffers the same problem. Just last week, California had 5 times higher natural gas prices than the rest of the country. Pipeline infrastructure. We have these energy resources blocking the movement of these energy resources. There's nothing green about it.
And where does New England get its oil from?
Overseas, because of a crazy thing we have, like many of you know, the Jones Act, that is very expensive to ship things from the U.S. ports of Houston and the Gulf Coast, where we export oil to other U.S. ports. So they used to buy their oil from Russia as well, and now they're probably getting it from Nigeria or the Middle East. But standing in the way of energy infrastructure just means more cost, less safety, higher price, and lower human opportunity. But yet it's politically popular.
Let's go to the next online question. How do we overcome the misinformation being sold by climate change and environment fanatics?
Wow, great. A number of people have told me you shouldn't speak about climate change. It's too controversial. And my answer to that is 100% wrong. It's such a huge driving force in society today. We must speak about climate change. And again, I wrote this report that in 20 minutes, if you read that, you will know more about climate change than 99.9% of the people out there. And so you don't have to be an expert. To know the basic data, I think, is very important for this dialogue because everything has trade-offs. Everything has trade-offs. And so I often get asked when I give these talks at universities, do you think you're going to change everyone's minds or opinions? And my answer is, well, hopefully the people in the audience, my experience has shown I can change people's minds or opinions because most people are open-minded. Even college students you think are rabid about this, they've just never heard a thoughtful presentation of it. 80% of the people in the end of a college campus, at the end of a talk, will have a much more measured, realistic view of climate change. People are very movable on this topic. They just don't know that much about it. It feels good, it sounds good, they've only heard one side. The problem is that's a one-on-one or a classroom basis. That's not changing the world. My view, and remains my view, is the only thing that'll really change people's view on this is expensive and unreliable energy. When people can't afford to heat their house or their electricity grid goes out and their business has to shut down and move overseas or move to a different state with a reliable electricity grid, that brings sobriety. You know, Germany adamantly opposed to building natural gas import infrastructure because they're not going to need natural gas anymore. They maintained that line for 25 years, and they've already finished 2, and they're soon to finish their 3rd natural gas import terminal. They didn't get any more sober on climate change. In fact, the thoughtful people probably already were sober about climate change, but they were using this top-down, redesign the world energy system because it's politically convenient. But as soon as it hit German industry and people and all that, they're building infrastructure as fast as they can. And I think the same thing will happen here. The question is, how far do we sink before sobriety returns? Your country, I think, is the worst, your home country. Yeah. The United Kingdom is the worst example of a country that just slowly strangled itself and has to date never reversed course. Mm-hmm. They've just exported all jobs and industry out of the United Kingdom. It's just, to me, so ironic. The birthplace of the Industrial Revolution is nearly completely deindustrialized.
Well, it's particularly ironic because the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson used to write extensively about the need for energy development. And then when he became Prime Minister, that fell by the wayside. And he changed his mind completely, which lost him his premiership. Yeah. Question from over here.
Hi, I'm Gage, and I'm a legal counsel in a Senate office. And the first thing I noticed when I was flipping through the packet was the commitment to ESG section, and you mentioned it up here. When I hear ESG, you know, what comes to my mind is rising gas prices, DEI, puberty blockers for 8-year-olds. You know, is it really smart for a fossil fuel company, or really any company, to align themselves with this movement?
So great question, and I wrestled with that, you know, when I wrote those words and said that. My take on it, although it may not have been my take has been, we're defining ESG. We're going to make the environment better. The greatest force for social progress in the history of the world ever is business. So for us, that's a culture of our company. That's the way we roll, our engagement with our communities. And people love to work at Liberty because we're very passionate about our culture, internal to our company and external to our company. None of that comes from the box checking I get from forms from other companies to satisfy their social criteria. So I am adamantly against the top-down definition of what is environmentally the right trade-offs, what socially is the right thing. Governance should be pretty straightforward, align management with ownership, with shareholders. But you make a good point, and in fact, you probably won't see that in next year's report, because my goal was to redefine ESG, but when people hear ESG, they think of top-down control. So very fair critique. I think you're spot on. In fact, I say in the letter in this report that it's unfortunate in my view, two things created the modern world, allowed doubling human life expectancy, modern medicine, planes, trains, and automobiles, the rise of human liberty, and hydrocarbons. Everything else followed from those two phenomenon, and now we have a investment ESG movement that opposes both of them. It's anti-hydrocarbons and it's anti-bottom-up social organization because they want to give you the questions that you answer to decide if you're socially virtuous. And I adamantly oppose that. So by using those words in that context you just read, I think it's a fair critique.
Well, the next online question is, all dependable data indicates there's no climate crisis. Why doesn't Heritage focus on this more? Well, that's probably a question for me. In September, Heritage started its Center on Energy, Climate, and Environment. We have podcasts. We have a newsletter called The Charge that comes out every 2 weeks. We have multiple scholars writing op-eds and columns in newspapers and media outlets. And we have monthly events, and we've invited Chris. So we are trying to do as much as we can. In addition, we have a Climate Science Advisory Committee, and we're going to be publishing some papers on this. But if any more of you have ideas of what we should do, then please let me know.
Let me agree with Diana. I wrote a piece about a year ago in the Denver newspaper, sort of a long-form editorial, and I opened with, there is no climate crisis. There is no energy transition either. You know, we can't be subtle about those things. We need to speak clearly. In fact, I released a video just today that goes through what I say 5 terms that people in our industry and across this country use that are all wrong. They're deceptive and they're destructive. Climate crisis, energy transition, carbon pollution, clean energy, and dirty energy. All those terms are nonsense terms that were made up by alarmists who oppose our industry, but yet they're in widespread use today, and I think that's unfortunate. So I took 12 minutes to try to shoot down each of them one by one. But I agree, all of us, including Heritage, should do more, and Diana shall.
And when I go around the country talking on campuses, the title of my talk is Santa Claus, the Tooth Fairy, and Net Zero 2050. And I ask them how many believe in Santa Claus, how many believe in Tooth Fairy, and how many believe in Net Zero 2050. And in fact, one professor stood up and said, I believe in the Tooth Fairy. I am the Tooth Fairy. Anyway.
I love that title.
Yeah.
That's good, Diana.
Let's go to you.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Kent Lassman with the Competitive Enterprise Institute. One theory we often hear is that leading politicians, business leaders like yourself, they suffer. They suffer socially when they come out and speak these sorts of truths that you're talking about, that you've written about. I wonder, have you suffered, and in what ways? Or is that just a theory with no basis?
So great question, Kent. And yeah, I hear that all the time from other leaders in my industry. Chris, God bless you. You're taking the bullets. We love what you're doing, but we're not going to say that publicly. I mean, across our industry, I hear that. And my answer to your question is, I'm not suffering at all, at all. I want to engage in this dialogue or debate. I go to universities. I testify in front of the Climate Crisis Committee. If you lay out a rational, thoughtful argument of these things, the opponents have nothing. They're quiet. I did a debate at CU Boulder, the World Affairs Council event. The Boulder mayor was the moderator. New York Times renewable energy reporter, anti-frack professor from Penn State, and me. In a Boulder crowd, hundreds of people and thousands online, and crushingly won that debate. In the eyes of the Boulder people that were in the room. I think if you couch this in everything has trade-offs, human poverty and energy energizing society matters, you understand something about climate change and the trade-offs that are going there, people can change their perspective pretty quickly. So no, people have said, oh, you write this report, investors are going to be mad. I'm waiting. I'd love to hear critiques or pushbacks, and I like, if I'm on TV and I say this stuff, I want the news person to say that's bullshit. They never do, never do. No, I think honest, candid, sincere truth can engage dialogue or whatever, but does not cost me socially.
So we have a couple of online questions about Europe. With the current war situation in Europe, the oil and gas exporting and importer dynamics have changed internationally. Where will the U.S. find herself in the oil and gas international economy in the next 5 years? And similarly, with the ongoing war in Ukraine, have you seen an increased demand for American LNG? Are there plans to increase the number of LNG terminals in Europe to counter Putin?
Yeah, well, yes to all of those. Yes to all of those. For the first time this last year, the majority, I think over 60% of U.S. exported LNG went to Europe. Mostly it goes to Asia, right? The longtime biggest importer of LNG in the world was Japan. China recently passed Japan. Korea's up there too, because they're three big industrially powerful nations that don't have easily producible natural gas resources. Europe has always been an LNG importer, but was mostly pipeline exports, and the biggest component of that from Russia. And in fact, I think foolishly didn't build the infrastructure to get LNG if there ever were going to be any problems, because it's probably not a crazy stretch that there might be a problem with Russia as your key supplier. And sure enough, that's happened. So yes, the demand for natural gas is growing quickly. Let me say one other thing. People often say, well, we have this crisis in high energy prices because Russia invaded Ukraine. I think it's the other way, and I wrote a piece on this. In September of 21, so 5 months before Russia invaded Ukraine, global natural gas prices more than doubled for a simple reason, because demand outstripped all the liquefaction and transportation capacity for it, right? Natural gas over the last 10 or 15 years is by far and away the fastest growing energy source, hands down. Solar and wind on a percentage basis, but they're tiny. On new energy brought to the world to make human lives possible, natural gas is the fast growing resource. So you need infrastructure, increasing infrastructure to move that. So last September, we crossed that threshold. Global natural gas prices skyrocketed. Pakistan had to shut down schools because they couldn't afford enough LNG. All their buses are powered on natural gas. People couldn't afford to heat. Fertilizer plants got shut down. China banned the export of nitrogen fertilizer, the most important substance in the world. 50% of global food production, 50% comes from one factor, nitrogen fertilizer. Nitrogen fertilizer is made out of natural gas. The hydrogen comes from the natural gas, and the energy, high temperature heat source, is natural gas, this Haber-Bosch process. So the world went into an energy crisis in September of 2021. This is when Putin has maximum leverage, right? He started to amass troops and invaded 5 months later. Now, he's wanted to invade Ukraine forever. This didn't cause it, but I think it massively set the timing of it. When he first went into Ukraine, 2014, a time of high oil and high natural gas prices. People that are resource providers are going to use that leverage when they have it. But we let him have that leverage by the slow foot dragging in this country to not build more LNG export capacity. We have enormous resources, tremendous economics, worldwide demand for it. The only country that can move quickly, but yet we slow dragged our feet, gave Putin huge leverage, and we are where we are. Now, there's more import capacity coming on in this country over the next 5 or 10 years. But we're going to be in a sticky global gas situation for many years because of a lack of infrastructure, not a lack of gas.
It does suggest that perhaps we don't want to be dependent on China for batteries for our 100% fleet of battery electric vehicles in 2035, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the Chinese have this terrible energy dependence, and they're envious of what we have, but they have this manufacturing capacity, and they've seen the way the world is going to invest trillions of dollars, and they have built the infrastructure to build polysilicon and solar panels and wind and rare earth metal processing, cobalt processing. China has built the workshop to buy all the things we say we want to buy.
Right. Yeah. And in fact, next event next month is going to be with 2 people from Africa, from Cote d'Ivoire and South Africa, talking about these minerals in Africa and how the Chinese are vacuuming them up before we can get them. It's going to be our next event. Let's go over here.
What do you consider?
Maybe you should wait for the mic and state your affiliation.
John Brightbill, I'm an attorney here in town. What do you consider to be the most counterproductive federal regulatory policies that are negatively impacting our energy competitiveness?
Wow, I got to be more politically savvy to know the answer to that. Certainly the increasing reach of regulatory bodies. You know, the EPA has made it very hard to do stuff in new areas, you know, and that's not just oil and gas, right? Solar or wind. Building infrastructure has become incredibly hard in this country. The Keystone Pipeline gets built up to the Canadian border, even part of it on our side, and then that gets canceled. That hurts the U.S. refining sector that needs that different kind of heavy oil they produce in Canada that we don't produce much in the U.S. I personally recently wrote a long comment letter on the SEC proposed climate guidelines. This is just trying to scare money and capital out of our industry. The FERC has been incredibly obstructive in getting infrastructure built and all that, again, in the name of climate change. They wanted to pass a new rule that any pipeline had to consider the climate impacts of that pipeline and the extreme weather impacts. I wrote a long comment letter on that on the Gulf Coast, showing them the data and what's happening. But again, it isn't driven. What's frustrating to me is the policies are not based on actual climate damages. They don't even look or learn. It's just sort of, let's oppose fossil fuels because either they think that's politically effective for them or somehow they're naive enough to believe this is making the world a better place. The endangerment finding on carbon dioxide, I think, was also false on the merits, and it is given a way for the government to grow its tentacles and grow its stuff in there. The government having regulatories to trade off cost benefits and safety, there's a role for the government there. But all these different things have been used simply to pursue really a political agenda. It's not an energy agenda. It's a political agenda to oppose hydrocarbons, which is, it's just crazy. And as they say, look, most of it enriches the people that are already in the industry, right? Because you're reducing supply and you're jacking up prices. But you're hurting communities, you're hurting, we want to reshore stuff in the United States. Well, when people want to reshore in the United States, they care about two things. What's the energy price, the energy cost and reliability, and the workforce. And we're undermining those very things that are just central to bringing jobs, manufacturing, and high quality lives in this country. So truly, it is an all-of-government approach that is trying to make it harder and harder for hydrocarbon development here.
Chris, we just have a couple of minutes left, and I'd like to give you a chance to summarize your message for our audience here and also for our large online audience.
Great. Look, energy matters. It enables everything else humans do. You know, you work for Google or Facebook, and you think, oh, I don't care about energy. Well, the internet, of course, and servers and AI are huge users of energy. Energy is what's enabled this transformation in the human condition. So I encourage everyone to learn a little bit more about it and to push for sober, thoughtful trade-offs in this area. It's just so desperately missing from the dialogue. And don't be shy. I mean, I get a frustration with my own industry. People don't engage in the energy dialogue. They keep our head down. You know, they won't shoot at us. No, this is a global problem. I'll end with what I think is the most outrageous thing this movement has done, which is at the climate conference in Glasgow in the late 2021. You know, 19 nations pledged to end development lending to developing countries for any hydrocarbon or hydrocarbon infrastructure. This is 3 million easily preventable deaths a year from indoor air pollution. Like, this is infuriating to me that we haven't ended that problem yet. Market forces and private capital will eventually end this, but putting barriers or obstacles to people trying to live lives like us, that's not just wrong, that's immoral.
Yeah. No, you are absolutely right. And we're going to hear next month from Thierry Tanot from Côte d'Ivoire and François Bed from South Africa about the problems that these countries are having and the African continent because of lack of loans for conventional fuel projects. Well, I'd like to thank you so much for coming, Chris. It has really meant a lot to us. We've all enjoyed hearing you. We're going to spread your message. We're going to spread betterment of human lives. And let's all give Chris a big hand.